And a very good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Spiritual Topics Night on a Saturday night, coming from the Paul Christian Spiritualist Church in Poole, Dorset in the UK. Very great delight to introduce a lovely gentleman to you, Mr. JAMIE Aylward. JAMIE is the president of the excuse me, take two, the Exeter Spiritualist Centre. And you're also hypnotherapist, Reiki master, and what have I omitted?
Not Reiki master,
not Reiki master, hypnotherapist. Beg your pardon.
Unless a new accredited healer as well, but.
Right. Okay. I knew the healing vein came in there. So, JV, sir, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely wonderful. We're looking forward to hearing your topic for tonight. I think without further ado, if we go straight into that for your presentation for us tonight. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming along. I wanted to put on this talk because, well, firstly, somebody tried to stop me talking about near-death experiences. They said there was no evidence. But also at the hypnotherapy convention the last time I went, it was clear that they just were totally unaware of all the evidence that consciousness does continue. So they very kindly allowed me to speak. So I produced this talk. So it's quite long, so I'll just crack on with it. If I can get my mouse to start doing the presentation. So yeah, the nature of consciousness. Basically, the current Western scientific view is that everything is produced by the brain. Consciousness is produced by the brain. Now, if that were to be the case, then things like telepathy, mediumship, and all the stuff that we're used to just can't possibly happen, because everything is produced from a biochemical process, an electrical process in the brain. Essentially, if you really take that view, it means we are biological robots. Everything is determinism. Everything happens because of a prior event. Well, we know we're not biological robots, but if this isn't the case, then we are spiritual beings. So the other way to look at it is dualism. So we're a soul within a human body. If you take that one step further, then there's panpsychism, where consciousness is actually in everything. I'm trying to get my mouse to work there. So let's look at the filter theory. So this is we're a spirit in a human body, and the brain is a block, if you like, a filter, a necessary filter for us to actually continue living this life. But this idea was put out by Hippocrates, first of all, 2,000 years ago, and in the early 1900s, taken up by William James and Frederick Myers. And more recently, which is really quite exciting in terms of scientific awareness, this chap Kelly and his colleagues have produced this book called Irreducible Mind, Towards a Psychology for the 21st Century, and they put forward this idea there. Now, all these things are evidence not only that the brain is a filter of our higher consciousness, but also that life continues afterwards. Now, many of these things just on their own are sufficient evidence, but if you put them all together, it really is, in my opinion, irrefutable evidence that consciousness continues and life continues. So let's look at quantum physics. The double slit experiment. So this guy called Young wanted to find out whether light was a wave or a particle. So simply, as you can see in the picture there, double slit and shone light through it, or individual photons was the idea. So that if light is a particle, then you'll get a double slit pattern. If light was a wave, then you get an interference pattern. What they got was not, well, they expected to get a double slit, and they did while they were looking at it. But what they didn't expect is that while they weren't looking at it, it turned into a wave. So observation collapses the wave function. Now, Max Planck, he was really the father of quantum physics. So after his research, this is what he said: "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." That's essentially panpsychism. Einstein: "A human being is part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." Again, this is panpsychism, and also the fact that we are actually connected. So if you can prove that telepathy exists, then that blows the Western scientific, the materialistic view that the brain produces consciousness. Because, as I said before, all our thoughts are created from biochemical processes if the brain creates consciousness. So telepathy can't happen. Remote viewing, all these rest. Well, Dean Radin is a parapsychologist and researcher, and he puts all this research together. He doesn't do all the research, he does some research. The Ganzfeld tests, for example, there have been sufficient Ganzfeld tests, which are a fancy way of a remote, a person sending remote pictures remotely to a viewer. Okay, so all these things, he says, reach the 6 sigma level. That's probability against chance of 1 billion to 1 against chance. So the Ganzfeld tests, something like 29 quintillion to 1 against. Now, I don't even know what that number is, but it's more than 1 billion. Then the point is, the evidence is there. The scientific evidence for telepathy existing is there. Therefore, the Western materialistic view of consciousness is incorrect. Remote viewing, that's another one. And incidentally, you might like to know that Saddam Hussein's location was found by it was a separate project from the military. It was the military that found him, but this separate project of remote viewers just wondered, oh, could they find him? And they described the exact location that the military found him. In Jimmy Carter's time, this downed plane was found in the Congo through remote viewing. The Global Consciousness Project is well worth investigating. I shan't talk too much about it now, but basically Roger Nelson and Dean Radin had a system where they put random number generators around the world just to see whether global awareness, global consciousness could affect them. So events like the death of Princess Di made these random number generators less random. The Twin Towers, the 2004 tsunami, things like that. And Roger Nelson's summary of the research, saying that they've done this so many times, this shows that collective thought has an effect. Therefore, we have a responsibility to use it wisely. Now, acquired savant syndrome. Savants are amazing. I don't know whether you've seen Rain Man. That was based on a chap called Kim Peek. Tiny example, some cocktail sticks were thrown on the floor, and he said, oh, 248. I mean, that might not have been the exact number, but the point was that he was able to just know how many cocktail sticks had been dropped on the floor. So it's fascinating as well, because are we all hidden geniuses without knowing about it? A chap was flown over London and just once, and was able to draw the Houses of Parliament in absolute precise detail. Now, normally, that's beyond our abilities. Rupert Sheldrake and others think that memory is actually not stored in the brain. This chap called Orlando Serrell, he was a young boy playing basketball, got hit on the side of the head very nastily by a ball, and was unconscious for a while. And then when he recovered, when his headaches went, he had this ability to do calendrical calculations. That means, give him a date, he'd tell you exactly whatever day was in the future, exactly whether it was a Thursday or a Wednesday. This Antonio Cicoria was struck by lightning, and now he can play the piano. The point is, if the brain is a filter and you damage the filtering capacity of the brain, then you open up the potential for this wider expanded awareness, and that's potentially what's happening here. Terminal lucidity. So when you've got people with things like meningitis, dementia, or brain damage, towards the end of life, just before they die, now their brain has been damaged, but so to wake up, if you like, just before they die with complete lucidity, to be able to hold a conversation, recognizing the people that they'd forgotten, because it's so sad when with people with dementia, they just don't recognize their wife or their husband. But just before death, on many occasions, they will suddenly become totally lucid, have a perfectly good conversation for 5 minutes, and then pass on. And this particular case I've got on the screen there, this called Haig, in his research, reported a case of a young man dying of lung cancer that had spread to his brain. Now, the brain scan showed the tumors had really damaged his brain. There was nothing left. But in the days before his death, he'd lost all ability to speak. But according to his nurse and a wife, an hour before he died, he woke up and said goodbye, and had a decent conversation with them. Deathbed visions. Now, this is something I really want to talk about, because the dying process, and I think people really do need to understand the dying process is actually a lovely thing if you can let go. They're moments of great joy, because the dying person will have a reunion with somebody that's come to meet them, like a former wife or a parent, or just a friend. And well, this is Steve Jobs, by the way. If you don't know whether you recognize Steve Jobs, the former head of Apple computers. That's an iPhone, obviously. So according to his sister, his last words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." And this is the point. They suddenly see something which is just totally wonderful. They are exciting reunions with a former loved one. 2 major research studies show that 50% of people are likely to experience them. Now, what that actually means is that we're all going to experience these things. Okay, we might, people on drugs or other instant deaths. Obviously that's not going to happen, but essentially it's what happens. And if you go into a hospice and ask them about it, then they'll say, yeah, it happens all the time. So it's all, and again, it's also accompanied with a feeling of great peace. And that's often the case anyway. I remember a friend of my mother's, just before she died, she said, I don't know whether I'm near death, but I just feel so peaceful and it's fine. And so the question is not, do they happen? Because they do happen. It's, are they real or are they hallucinations? Well, in many cases, you'll get the knowledge of the death of a loved one that they didn't know had died, because where say you've got a sibling and his brother or sister has died, it's the last thing you're going to tell a dying person, that their brother or sister's died. Yet they found out about the death of their brother or sister because they're the one that's come to meet them, come to take them away. So death really isn't to be feared, and it's important not to hold on to someone who's dying. The important thing to do is to talk about death before that situation occurs. You don't need to have any unresolved issues, because it's far easier to communicate before they die than afterwards. And you don't need to ask them to hang on simply because they feel you're going to be sad if they go. Deathbed coincidences. Well, these are where somebody will just know that a relative or a friend or someone they love has died, and clocks do stop. Animals do behave strangely. Peter Fenwick is a parapsychologist, and again he was a skeptic. He thought, oh, this only happens in America, and he started doing his research, and he's a great what's the word for it, emissary or whatever of near-death experiences and all these things. And this is one of his examples from his book. He said the detail, he says, which is undeniable. So in this case, is Elizabeth Daniel heard her ex-husband's voice one morning at 4:15 in the morning, and in a way that was so clear that he could have been in the room. And he said, we no longer need to talk. Well, she'd divorced him 28 years earlier, so really wasn't expecting to hear from him. And, because being divorced, it took a couple of days to find out that actually that was the exact timing. But this is a hallmark of these deathbed coincidences, that they happen at precisely the moment that somebody dies. So these are personal after-death communications. So this GP called Dewey Reeves found that 50% of the 66 widows that he interviewed had sensed the presence of their dead spouse in one way or another, whether they'd smelt their perfume or seen them or heard their voice. And this chap, Rees, who was a researcher, found that 81% in his study. And curiously, and not necessarily surprisingly, none of them wanted to tell their doctors. Now, my brother-in-law saw my late wife after she died. She physically appeared to him and playing with her hair, saying, "Look, my hair's fine. I'm fine." Because obviously my brother-in-law was deeply upset, and there was a great connection between the two. I didn't have that experience. But the experience I had was absolutely fascinating, because it was several months after my wife died. She was only 34. And that particular night, I wasn't even thinking about her. I'd been to a party and I was actually in a really good mood and looking, I was happy for the first time. And as I was going to sleep, but I wasn't asleep, just like that, it really was as fast as that. I had this sudden communication from her, and it wasn't the communication itself that was important. It was, to me, it was the way it happened. My response went before I'd had time to edit it. Now, normally we try and put things in a way that you think is the best way to put something, but no, it didn't have any time for that. My brain sent my consciousness sent it, and my brain would have wanted to have edited it. And that's why it was so fascinating. Also, it wasn't an hallucination, because it was based upon the current events, and the reason why she made that communication was right. She was right. So it's not an hallucination. Now, Bill and Judy Guggenheim studied after-death communications in 1998 with this after-death communication project. Oh, by the way, I put various QR codes. So if you've got a mobile phone and we're interested in a link, that's a quick way to grab the link. So these people interviewed over 2,000 people and collected over 3,300 accounts. And they estimate that about 60 million Americans have had one of these after-death communication, so they're very common. Lucid dreams, another reason or bit of evidence saying that the brain is a filter and that our consciousness is greater than what we normally imagine it is. So James Watson, in a lucid dream, discovered the structure, the helical structure of DNA. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was given the entire poem of the Kubla Khan in a dream. when he woke up, he wrote it all down, but he'd forgotten the last verse. So it took him a little while, it was months or years, to remember the last verse. This guy called Mendeleev got the idea of the periodic table. He'd been working on it. There was a problem, but in his dream, he saw the exact structure and everything made sense. Niels Bohr, the structure of the atom. See, where is this information coming from? If it's real, and clearly in these particular cases, it was real. If our consciousness isn't greater, if there's information out there. So anyway, it's fascinating. And I had a lucid dream. It's quite personal, but so I'm not going to tell you all of it. But basically, had I not acted on the information that I got in a dream, then I wouldn't be here. What was particularly fascinating, I find that I'm not easy for mediums to give messages to. And in this particular dream, there was my mother and a friend of hers who was a medium in life. Now, to me, that was calling in the cavalry because it was vital that I had this message. So there was my dear late mother doing what she could to make sure she communicated with me. And fortunately, she did. Now, you've all seen mediums, so it's probably not so relevant in this talk to go unduly into mediumship, because you all know how it works. There have been some scientific investigation into the verification that the information they're getting has been obtained in a decent, in an honest way. That's the word I'm looking for. And finally, scientists are looking at the effects that basically somebody goes to a medium to help with bereavement, it works. and this is one of the things in the last hypnotherapy convention that upset me slightly, because there was this bereavement counselor talking about current thinking, and the current thinking is to talk about a continued connection, but she only meant in an abstract way. And she also said, recognize that there are lots of people who say that they've had some sort of communication, and that these were actually just hallucinations. Well, I nearly at that point stood up and said, "Oi, no, I've had one. I know it's not an hallucination." And you know what I do with when people come to me for help with bereavement, and usually I don't charge for this at all, because having experienced it, it's something that's, you know, close to my heart, if you like. But I get them in a deeply relaxed state, and then I'll invite them to invite their loved one to come and talk to them. And in that relaxed state, you see, you're getting the brain, the filter, a little bit out of the way, and the closeness that they feel. Most people feel that the communication they've had is genuine. But with mediumship, we do have to be careful, because it's fantastic. I mean, in my role, if you like, at the Exeter Spiritualist Centre, I must have seen over 100 mediums in perhaps 250 different sessions. I've seen quite a lot. And obviously, you know, they're all genuine. I've only ever once, and not at Exeter, seen somebody which I believed was doing it fraudulently. So mostly they're genuine, lovely people. They don't charge. Perhaps they charge for travel, but you know, it's not a money spinner. That's the point. The motivation isn't for money. The motivation is to help people. But nonetheless, I've seen some brilliant readings, and I've seen cases where I've been convinced they've just been reading their mind. Now, so it's an awful responsibility, because if you feed back to somebody what they're actually thinking about and what they're intending to do or they're doing, and actually it's not very helpful, but you encourage them, then you know, that's not helpful. On the other scale of it, I've seen the accuracy of some mediums. It's as if they've got a camera following the person. And on 2 occasions, and only 2 occasions, but these were wonderful, I've seen or witnessed people getting a hug. They actually felt their loved one just surrounding them and giving them a hug, and that was deeply moving. So mediumship is such a wonderful gift to have, obviously with the responsibility that comes with, but scientists are now finding that the information that they do give, when they're giving information accurately, their brain shows a different brain pattern, and it's as if they're getting their brain out of the way. There's less brain activity in some areas, so it's all fascinating stuff. Oh, this slide is slightly out of kilter. So what we're looking at here is past life memories. So Helen Wambach was a skeptic, so she was going to prove that the past life memories were just figments of the imagination. So she did a 10-year study of past life recalls under hypnosis. Now, trying to trace information. If somebody says, "Oh, I remember being, a servant in a household in 1620 or something," then how are you going to find the household? It's really, really time-consuming. So what Helen Wambach did was to look at basic data that could be proven. So things like the clothing, the utensils, the money, and she interviewed something like 1,200 students, 1,100 students, something like that. But at the end of her research, this is her comment: fantasy and genetic memory could not account for the patterns that emerge. And she doesn't believe in reincarnation. She knows it. Now, Ian Stevenson, he was the main man, if you like. He spent 40 years of his life researching childhood memories. He went for the cases where it was spontaneous memories. So he wouldn't use hypnosis because he didn't want other scientists to say, well, look, that could have been a planted memory. So he tracked cases where people would just know about a former family, and his case would be solved if he found the former personality and found, after rigorous investigation, that there was no other possible explanation, no matter how improbable, and he'd throw the case out if it could be explained in a normal way. So out of 2,600 cases, 895 were proven no other explanation. Now, a couple of examples here. Swarnlata Mishra, her previous personality was called, forgotten it for the moment. Hang on. Bia Patak, that's it. Now, she was able to describe her house, its location, the fact there was some lime kilns nearby. And when she was taken to her family to meet them, she was only about 11. She lowered her eyes and bowed in a manner that she would have done for the culture in front of her husband. She was able to recognize something like 20 different people who this former personality would have known. She identified or told her former husband that he'd acquired 1,400 rupees from her just before her death, and was from a box in her bedroom. She commented on the changes to the house. One of her former sons pretended not to be this former son, but she insisted, "No, you're all right. Stop trying to mislead me." They take on the personality of these people. Some children will just direct their parents to they say, "Oh, this is our former house," and go down here and it's late. They just know their way around. Ravi Shankar, not a musician, his former personality was Munna. Now, he described the fact that he was his throat was slit. He was abducted by a barber and a washerman. He knew exactly where his body was buried. All he wanted was his toys back. When he was taken to meet his former father, his father was wearing a watch. He said, "That's the watch that you bought Munna in Bombay." He even knew that he'd eaten guavas, on the morning of the abduction, and only the family would have known that. From his evidence, the barber and the washerman were arrested, but as there wasn't sufficient evidence, because it was only Ravi Shankar's word for it, unfortunately they were released. But out of all these cases, Stevenson found that 35% of the verified cases had some sort of birthmark relating to their form, the method of death. So this isn't Ravi Shankar, but you can see this chap has got what looks like either a rope mark or a slit across his throat. And on the other picture, one you've got the photo of the chap with his birthmarks, and then below you've got the coroner's sketch of the shotgun wounds relating to his former personality's murder. Now, if you've got physical evidence 35% of the time, that's statistically so unlikely to happen by chance. It's but as Stevenson says, what evidence, if you had, would make you believe in reincarnation? Now, James Leininger, his case was investigated by a chap called Jim Tucker, who took over from Ian Stevenson. He would have nightmares. He'd wake up kicking in his bed, and the nightmares would get progressively worse. It turned out, as they asked him further, that he said he used to fly Corsair aircraft, and that's a Corsair, by the way, in the picture is a Corsair. And he said they would get flat tires, and he said he was shot down. The ship he was on was the Natoma. It turned out to be the Natoma Bay. And one curious thing, at 4, they were in a toy shop, and he picked up this toy, and his mother said, "Oh, look, it's got a big bomb underneath." He said, "No, Mummy, that's a drop tank." The amount of detail in this particular case is staggering. So there's another QR code there for you, and the link as well. But he even recognized a former colleague, Bob Greenwell, by his voice. And they really investigated this. They found the exact spot. They found people, eyewitnesses, who said, yes, they saw this former personality. There's a plane hit on the engine and burst into flames, just as James Leininger had said. Now, you couldn't get this detail from any other source, because he was 4 or 2 when he started having these nightmares. Anyway, so they're worth investigating. Brian Weiss and the Bloxham tapes. Well, the Bloxham came first. That was Arnold Bloxham. He was interviewed. He was a hypnotherapist, and he did past life regression. And I think Jeffrey Iverson did a BBC documentary on him, where that showed all these cases that he'd done, and the evidence which could be found to be accurate from those tapes. Now, Brian Weiss is more recent. He again was a skeptic. He's an American psychologist, and this lady came to him who'd been in psychotherapy for years with absolutely no benefit at all. So he thought he'd regress her, and he was a bit surprised when she started talking about his life in Egypt. Well, every single time that they'd come through some trauma, usually associated with the death of a particular former personality, then this thing would just go away. So in 3 months, this lady that in his book he called Catherine, that's Many Lives, Many Martyrs is the name of his book. So she was fixed. Now, curiously, the very first time I regressed somebody, she came for a snake phobia, and she's very happy for me to talk about it. I've asked her permission. She then with a phobia, you just generally do desensitization. So you put someone in their imagination, you present them with the issue, and you just go over it and over it again, or look at the good things, whatever. People get used to it, and the phobia goes. But that didn't work. So I regressed. I said, we'll just go back to the cause of this. And she described, first of all, being a little black boy asked to get water from a river with a bucket. And there were snakes on the rocks, and he was frightened. Now, he didn't get bitten. And I said, oh, and curiously, what year is this? And she said something like 1894. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Then in another one, slightly later, it was 19, and I can't remember now, she described being a young girl, and she was bitten by a snake. Now, the point was, I didn't do anything clever. I just brought out these, or she brought out these memories. And there was no planting of ideas. I said, describe where you are. No leading questions. But the point was, just these memories surfacing got rid of the phobia. And for fun later, I took her to the Exeter reptile shop, which was there at the time. And we went in, and there was a snake, or lots of snakes in there. We said, well, that one's quite cute. So the point is, if phobias aren't caused by a past life regression, then what else is causing them? Why did it work if it wasn't real? Now, this is what I really want to talk about, because what we have here is a phenomenon that's been written about since 400 BC. Plato was the first one. It has profound and beneficial changes on people, not only the people that have them, but vicariously through the people who investigate them, and even people who read about them. So I do strongly recommend you reading these things, because they actually have an effect in you. You have this sense of comfort that comes from them. And there's this comment, I've forgotten who made this comment, but it was simply the most amazing, beautiful thing I have ever experienced. Now, imagine someone's bereaved, then if they get the idea that actually it's not that bad, and not only that bad, it's the most amazing thing that they've ever experienced. Okay, it's not going to answer the grief, but it's going to help, because they know that the loved one is okay. Now, these near-death experiences are the same across cultures. It's not what your preconceptions of it will be. It'll be as it'll be. Okay, there's some cultural interpretation. So if they see a being of light, they might describe it according to their culture. So Allah, Buddha, Christ, or just a being of light. Blind people have them, and perhaps the most fascinating thing is that the near-death experiences of young children who couldn't possibly have heard about them by any other means, too young to read about them, they say the same things. So it was Raymond Moody in 1975 who triggered the massive amount of interest in these. He wrote a book called Life After Life, and he interviewed about, well, nearly 150 people, and found there were patterns. So ineffability, the inability to describe it, a feeling of peace, awareness of being dead, out-of-body experience, going through a tunnel, meeting a being of light, a panoramic life review, a border that if they knew that if they crossed the border, they couldn't come back, and that's very common. And his research triggered a whole load of things. So Bruce Grayson followed in suit, as did John Odette and Michael Sabon, Kenneth Ring. He's worth looking up on YouTube. And they all found the same thing. Now, Jeffrey Long, he's done the world a lot of good, bless him. He produced this webpage, the NDERF, that's a Near Death Experience Research Foundation, where he allowed people to upload their own NDEs, and we'll look at one in a moment. But from they got about 4,500 entries there now. So he's analyzes, because scientists don't like, generally speaking, they don't like retrospective studies. So where someone's had an experience 10 years ago or more, they can't examine the medical records. So they think, oh, well, you can't comment on it. But he says, well, you can, because there are patterns within these things I've already mentioned, like the children having the same experience of adults, and 90% of them, for example, involve a deceased loved one. Now, if they were hallucinations, then you'd get all sorts of weird things, wouldn't you? You might get the milkman. You might even expect the people to see the ambulance men. That would be logical. But hallucinations are frightening experiences. And also, hallucinations require brain activity. Well, what's happened with a cardiac arrest, for example, within seconds, the brain flatlines. There is no brain activity. So how can you have an hallucination without any brain activity? Might get onto a bit more of that later. Penny Sartori did a PhD in NDEs, and her story is worth looking at. She's written a book, well, various books. One is The Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences. She was first inspired to write a book by her experience as a nurse with a dying patient who just wanted to be allowed to die peacefully. And there was a moment when their eyes met and he was just saying, just leave me. And anyway, this inspired her to look into near-death experiences. And she spent 8 years doing it. More on her later. Pim van Lommel wanted to address the idea of progressive studies. So that's a study where you can actually examine the medical records. You can interview the people who've had the near-death experiences immediately after they've had them. So more about that later. Carry on. I've gone the wrong way. Going backwards. So there's the website for the NDERF, and there's also the International Association in Near-Death Studies. So that's another page to look at. And it's quite interesting that when, I don't know how many of you have seen the Netflix series Surviving Death, but if you can just read that in just 1 week after the release, it was number 3 in the top 10 most viewed programs. So Pim van Lommel, he's brilliant, and not only did he analyze these something like 380 people who'd had these near-death experiences. Being a scientist, he wanted to check, what really was happening. So he ruled out any medical reason. He looked into all sorts of the backgrounds, whether it was psychological problems that caused it or anything like that. None of that. There was no pattern. There was no reason why somebody should have a near-death experience over another person. He then interviewed people 2 and 8 years after, and curiously, 8 years afterwards, they still used more or less exactly the same wording. The memories of them had not faded at all. And again, this business of memory, just imagine this, somebody has flatlined, their heart stopped beating, yet they have these experiences where memory is generated while their brain is not working. There can be no scientific explanation for that other than what it appears to be on the face value. It can't be the last gasp of a dying brain. What does that mean? It's meaningless. Sampagna, again, did a progressive study. He had hoped to capture, well, he put images. You rigged various operating theatres with images so that if somebody was out of their body, they might be able to see them. This was a multinational thing. There were Austria, the States, Southampton, lots of different places. And this is actually a bit worrying, really. Out of 2,060 cardiac arrest. They only had 330 survivors, so don't have a cardiac arrest, and 101 were interviewed. Well, these things that he's reported, again, fit in with not only Raymond Moody's categories, but also what people have been talking about since people started writing about them. So 13% reported senses more vivid than normal. 13% reported feeling separate from their body. 8 encountered a mystical being. 7 came to a border, a point of no return. And 2%, that's just 2, had visual awareness. Now, unfortunately, 1 wasn't in a state that they could interview. And that means that only 1 was able to be interviewed about what he saw. But everything he described, from the use of the defibrillator to a particular person that came in, was exactly as the medical records have reported. So it was accurate. So how can you explain visual awareness out of your body if you don't have a soul? If the brain can't be producing it because the brain is nowhere near it. So the skeptics' explanations are hypoxia. That's lack of oxygen. Well, aircraft pilots, particularly in the RAF and things, often get lack of oxygen when they're doing loops and things like that. But those records have been examined, and there's no pattern there. And besides which, hypoxia might cause you to go unconscious, but remember, these people have flatlined. Their brain is unconscious. Another one is REM intrusion. Well, that's the idea that dreams might be popping into it. So there is DMT in your pineal gland, and that is thought to be responsible for producing, our dream images. But nonetheless, you've got to remember that these people basically dead. So you're not going to get a dream happening with showing you exactly what's going on in the operating theatre. So the point is, skeptics don't actually look at the data because they find it uncomfortable. They don't want to find out that this is how it is. Why, I can't work out, but they ignore uncomfortable data. Reconstruction is another line of argument. So, it's they've remembered, they picked it up from, well, this nurse said that nurse said that, so this is what must have happened, and then they think it's I mean, you can get fake memories. It's possible to believe or remember something that didn't quite happen, but not to the detail that these happen. Fraud, well, yes, it could be fraud, but what's the motivation? And would all these people be doing fraud? I doubt it. And hallucinations, again, hallucinations, as I said, are frightening experiences, and there's no pattern to them. Temporal lobe epilepsy has been dismissed. Pim van Lommel is the chap that you want to read if you want to understand how all the skeptics' alternative suggestions have been dismissed. Essentially, they ignore the data. Now, I want to read you this because this lady, Rachel, I've actually managed to communicate with her since reading this, and I'm hoping to have a session where I interview her, because she described herself as being quite a spiteful person, selfish person before her NDE, and now she is just so full of spiritual knowledge. It's just wonderful. So she was about to deliver, or was in the process of delivering a baby, and it went wrong. And so she says, I briefly hovered over my newborn baby, hoped she'd remember me. Then I was traveling. It felt like I was shooting through a tunnel, but I couldn't see any sides to it. It was dark but illuminated. I was not alone. I could sense a presence with me. I was tumbling forward, upward at an unfathomable speed. It felt like wind all throughout me, inside of me. I likened it at that age to being on a roller coaster, that rushing feeling. It was wonderful. I felt so light, so free. Simultaneously, I experienced this fully and watched myself experience this with clear vision from a little distance. I can still see myself tumbling if I concentrate on the memory, as if I were staring at a giant screen that filled the whole of every which way I turned. The movie was my life from birth to death, every minute of it, every event I had ever experienced. I watched it and relived it. It was at this point I realized that time did no longer appear to me as it had in my body. It was as if I were projected into a moment or dragged through time, backwards before forwards, to re-feel. I witnessed at this point the sexual abuse I had experienced and suppressed as a young child, as well as out-of-body experiences I had at this time and at night when I was lying in my bed. I could see myself flying out of my body, and I remembered. I watched my own poor mistakes and learnt from every reliving. I watched myself as a child bitten by a guinea pig and in shock half launch it onto the sofa. I felt shame at this time because I felt the fear of the guinea pig. No one condemned me. I was only asked, what had I learnt? I was comforted at this time, consoled and reassured. I had learnt so much, how big an impact my seemingly small actions had on a large scale, how my choices and behaviour rippled through the lives of countless others, how the love I showed spread like wildfire, how the way I mistreated others deeply hurt and affected them, and also how that pain, fear and confusion would then impact the lives of others too. In the time I spent in this reliving, I developed a deep gratitude for many things, the experience of life for one, the people and the hearts that had touched my soul in beautiful ways, and the fragility of being human. Now, that's so profound. How could that be invented, fraudulent, a hallucination, the last gasp of a dying brain? You know, and if you read these near-death experiences, most of them are as powerful as that. So the common things reported by ND is, and this is really comforting, you are loved unconditionally. Time, as you saw in that last, heard in that last thing, doesn't exist as we know it. We are beings of light and part of a single whole. Maybe that's panpsychism. The purpose of life is to learn to love unconditionally and to gain experiences. Can you learn to love as unconditionally as you are loved? Rupert Sheldrake, a researcher in this area as well, just coincidentally, but just pose this question: was John the Baptist actually a drowner? Did he induce these near-death experiences so that people could be enlightened? It's just a thought. So the life review is the crucial thing. The people who have life reviews in near-death experiences are deeply affected, profoundly and beneficially. And it's really worth reading the life reviews. Kenneth Ring, there's a YouTube video with Kenneth Ring explaining a life review. A friend of his was driving a truck and nearly ran over somebody who stupidly stood in front of him. Well, he was so angry at nearly hurting this chap that bizarrely he got out of his truck and he beat this chap up. And a few years later, when he had his own near-death experience, he relived this moment. He felt his own teeth crack. He felt every punch as he delivered it and as it was delivered. So from the victim's point of view. And that's very moving. So that's a YouTube video worth looking at. But basically, the life review is non-judgmental. It's cause and effect, but it's what did you learn? They've shown the consequences of their thoughts and actions. They feel the effects as if the other person. It's very fast, yet there's time to contemplate, even on certain thoughts. Time is a funny thing. I can't get my head around time not being linear, but anyway. But this feeling of being loved unconditionally. Now, the things that astound the skeptics are the vertical NDEs, the things that prove or have been seen by somebody when there's no possible way that they could have seen these things. So Maria's shoe, Maria had this NDE and reported she saw a worn out tennis shoe, particularly the toe was worn. Kimberly Clark Sharp, her social worker, went to investigate, and she found this shoe, and from the window, it was on a window ledge. You couldn't possibly, she said, you couldn't possibly have seen the detail on that shoe as Maria described, unless you were hovering outside the window. Pim van Lommel's research showed this one person. This was great because he came into the hospital in a coma, so couldn't have seen anything to do with the hospital whatsoever. Then in the operating theatre, his dentures were removed and put in the bottom shelf of a bottom drawer of a trolley. And after the operation, they didn't return his dentures, but he identified a nurse. Oh, she knows where my dentures are, and it described the whole thing. So that surprised them totally. Pam Reynolds is a very interesting case and totally confounds the skeptics, because she had a particular brain aneurysm that needed to be removed, and it was a pioneering operation. She had to be her blood had to be drained, her body had to be chilled to 25 degrees lower than normal, and she was wheeled into the operating theatre. They taped over her eyes. It's already under anaesthetic by then. They put speakers in her ears to emit 100 decibel clicks, so that they could pick those up on a brain scanner, just to really make sure that she was out of it. Yet midway through, she described this bone saw, the noise it made. She described it in detail. She described another doctor saying that her arteries or veins are too small, and the response being, "Oh, try the other leg." She was a bit surprised why they were messing around with her groin when this was a brain operation, but of course they had to put tubes in, in that way. She was also surprised by the number of people in the operating theatre, because apparently there was something like 20, and in the recovery room, this is again while she's still under anaesthetic, because the junior doctors were then left to do the stitching up. They were playing Hotel California. You can't check out, but you can check out, but you can never leave. And she told the surgeon that she thought this was a bit tasteless. Charbonnier, that's a French doctor, reported a case where a patient saw an amputation happen in a different operating theatre, where the amputated limb was put in a yellow bag. I've already told about Sampanya's research. Many NDEs themselves do their own investigation. Independently, Michael Sabom and Penny Sartori did a little bit of research on the survivors of cardiac arrests, and those who had NDEs in their cardiac arrest, unsurprisingly, really, could say exactly what happened, whereas the others made mistakes. Lloyd Rudy, that's another, that's just quite almost comical, if one of these things can be comical. It was a routine operation that went wrong. This chap was basically dead for 18 minutes. But this chap described the panic in getting the anaesthetist back, and the fact that the post-it notes were on a computer monitor. Well, in terms of timing, he couldn't possibly have seen the post-it notes, because the post-it notes were messages for Lloyd Rudy while he was in the operating theatre, while he couldn't be reached. So that they happened after the start of the operation. So if people can see things that actually happen, their spirit is not in their body. Consciousness is not a product of the brain. We are spiritual beings. And the wonderful thing about NDEs, they have amazing effects. People lose fear of death. They have an increased belief in the Creator. They're more spiritual, more psychic, more compassionate. They do more for charity. They live life more fully, and they can't wear watches. Well, something like 40%. They can wear watches, but the watches don't work. Probably no mediums who muck up computer equipment, but anyway. So here's a whole list of interesting cases of near-death experiences. Roger Benamor came back with an in-depth knowledge of quantum physics. She took it to a local university. The professor didn't know about some of the stuff she was talking about, and it was only when later research was published it was proved that she was right. Anita Moorjani, that's a very popular, very well-known near-death experience, but what's fascinating in that one is that she had Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now that's actually the same disease that my wife died of, and it's something that doesn't go away. If you have it the second time, chemotherapy sorts it out the first time, but the second time it really is really difficult to get rid of. Well, Anita Moorjani didn't go for chemotherapy. I think she was given a tiny bit at the end, but essentially she passed over. She met her father, who said, "It's not your time yet," and they had this discussion, and she saw the benefits of coming back. Incidentally, in this process, she witnessed exactly the operation. Her lungs were drained. This is a common thing because the lungs fill up with fluid, or the cavity does. So they have their lungs drained. So she was wheeled in a coma. This doctor called, I think, Dr. Chang, did this operation to her. When she woke up the next morning, she said, "Oh, hello, Dr. Chang, how are you?" And he was gobsmacked that she knew his name. "Well, you were the doctor that did that procedure on me the previous night." She also, her husband was surprised, and he said, "Well, he's the one that told you I had only hours to live." And he said, "Well, that's in a different room, 40 yards down the corridor." But the fascinating thing about Anita Moorjani is that within 2 weeks, her Hodgkin's lymphoma had gone. They couldn't find it. They couldn't find a single trace of it. Now that's staggering, and it's really encouraging over the power of the mind, because the power of the mind can fix that. Obviously, that was a rather sort of dramatic way of telling your body to heal, but she was on a mission now, and focusing on what she wanted to do seemed to heal her, and that for me is fascinating. Sean Madden's a friend of mine, and he had the most amazing near-death experience. You can find that online. Carl Jung brought back information from his that helped him with his psychotherapy. Now there's a QR code there and a link to the firefighters, because again, one of the skeptics things is, well, how can you corroborate these things? Well, there was a group of firefighters that had a near-death experience. They were overcome by smoke. They all saw each other having their near-death experiences. One of them, who'd got a bit of a gammy foot, one of them commented, "Hey, your foot's all right." Fortunately, they all recovered, but that's worth investigating, because it was a group experience. And some of these near-death experiences are shared. I know a medium who his mother passed over, and he went with her through this tunnel. Obviously, he wasn't allowed to continue, but that was a shared experience, and there are various shared experiences. So back to Penny Sartori, who did 8 years research and a PhD into near-death experiences. And as she says, the crucial point I want to make is that NDEs undoubtedly occur and have very real, life-changing effects on those who have them. Further to that, the wisdom gained during the NDE can be life-enhancing and have hugely positive effects on those who have not experienced an NDE. All we have to do is take notice and hear what these people have to say. And then she says, the biggest thing I've learned since undertaking my research is not about death, but about life. With our current technology and consumerist materialist way of life, we've forgotten the most important thing: how to live. And that's reflected by various others. Thomas Fleischmann says that he developed the same personality changes as those who'd had NDEs merely through his medical experience with those who had. And Kenneth Ring says they're like a benign virus. You just get hooked into them, if you like. And Pim van Lommel, they transformed his views on life and death. He says that his patients are his greatest teachers. So why isn't all this evidence I've been giving you so far recognized by mainstream science? The scientific method isn't terribly helpful because it won't allow you to hypothesize on anything that you can't measure. So if you're talking about somebody hearing voices, you can't have a hypothesis saying it's a spirit that's talking to them because they can't measure the spirit. Therefore, how are you going to get to the truth if you can't actually create a hypothesis based on it? But fundamentally, it's ignorance of the data and scientific dogma. Now, you have to understand that the research is dictated by the people at the top. Okay, and traditionally, the people at the top, certainly in America, have been from an atheist background. So this is the last thing they'd want to investigate. But this next quote says it all. So Bethany Butzer, if as a scientist or layperson you dare suggest that there might be other factors beyond matter, space and time that are involved in our physical reality, for example, by studying topics such as consciousness, psychic phenomena or mystical experiences, you run the risk of being metaphorically burned at the stake by having your research rejected, your reputation tarnished, and perhaps even losing your job. And of course, research, scientists need income, and it comes from research, so they've got to get funded. So this is the problem. It's dogma. A little quote from Nikola Tesla: "The day science begins to study the non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." But there is hope, because actually, since starting to write and study for this talk, just in the last few years, things have changed dramatically. So the top graph, there's an online database called PubMed. So that stores an awful lot of research, not at all, but an awful lot. So the first graph at the top right there is, I just did a quick search with near-death experience in the title. Not a fantastic scientific method, but nonetheless, you can see there's a bit of an exponential growth there. So that in 2018, 2020, there were about 20 bits of research. Nothing fantastic, but it's an upward shift. Now the next graph is remote viewing, and you can see that also is exponential. The bottom graph is by far the most interesting and gives loads of hope, because I searched for spirituality in the title of research. So you can see it's exponential, and in 2020, over 2,000 published research articles were entered into the database, 2,000. And all of a sudden, consciousness, studying consciousness is now less taboo. I think it was possibly triggered by this paper that was signed in 2016 by 100 scientists calling for less restriction on what they research. Because actually, most of the scientists, they believe in a continued existence. They believe that they are more than a biological robot. And I was very excited to see this article on panpsychism in Scientific American, published in 2020. So there's hope. And this is why NDEs are so powerful. Christian Stewart, who had one, my belief is that if everyone had an NDE, there would never be another war, no one would starve or be the victim of violence, and greed would become a thing of the past. This idea of panpsychism, Sean Madden in his NDE basically saying that we are all connected, that there is only one being. Now, I thought the title of this talk had changed by Lawrence, so I've added a little bit, because the journey of the soul. Now, there's a book. Now, curiously, this book suddenly appeared on my sideboard. This is 40 years ago. It's written in 1903. Now, don't be put off by the word. There's the word occultism in there. It just means hidden from normal view. And in 1903, it was accepted as it wasn't linked to any voodoo or whatever. And it's nothing to do with this. It's a really, really gentle book. So if you're interested in the journey of the soul, if you like, I strongly recommend you downloading this free PDF. Okay? So they're saying talking about the nature of thoughts. And what I love about this book is bearing in mind it was written in 1903, all this research that I've been reading about, it goes along with it all. Okay, some of the things like the afterlife, they can't possibly research, they can't possibly get results for that. But when it talks about telepathy being real and thoughts, it all fits. So in this book, it says thoughts are like must, like a perfume, if you like. Once they're emitted, they linger. Okay, so thoughts are real things. So when you've got a strong thinker or lots of people thinking the same thoughts, then it gets embedded in objects. I mean, you've probably been to development classes where somebody's brought an object, or a medium will ask you for a ring or something. The memory of the thought gets embedded in the object. And they also warn to send forth no strong thoughts or desires unless it meets with your higher self. Okay, so be careful what you wish for. Be careful for sending strong thoughts. Thoughts are real, and that collective thought works. And again, he's talking about with life, cause and effect. We're not punished for our sins, for our errors, if you like, by them, but not because of them. So it's like a child who burns his hand on a stove. The child isn't being punished by the stove. He just learns, not to do that again. And it also talks about equality of religions, if you like. It's all looking for the divine, wrapped up in different ways. Doesn't matter which particular religion we go for. Now, if you're wondering about what happens afterwards, well, I've read various things that say the same thing. So Victor Borge's book, Life in the World Unseen, this Yogi philosophy book, books by Dowding. I don't know whether you've read any of those, but they all talk about planes of existence. So you go into a level of your understanding. Now, this isn't scientific. This is just what various people have written, but it seems to be sensible. And there's never any going back. And there's almost no point in describing or trying to convey to us what the higher levels are like, because we wouldn't understand. And this business, I mean, lots of people, including me, think, well, I don't want to come back here again. Well, you can be comforted to a point, because reincarnation is a matter of choice. If we fail a lesson, we might have to come back. But if we don't, then it might be that after a while, we decide that for our own spiritual development, we have to come back and learn a particular thing. Now, curiously, I spoke to somebody whose child remembered past life, or remembered the in-between life, in that he remembered in particular this discussion he had with being sent down. Now, he knew he was going to be sexually abused, and he didn't want to come back. And the question was, well, if you don't learn this, then how are you going to help other people? So he reluctantly came down. But it's with consent, always with consent. So I strongly recommend you having a look at that book, the PDF, because it's fascinating. And it's gentle, it really is, you know. You came across your qualities honestly. This is how you are. No judgment. And well, it's wonderful. Now, I'm not going to talk for another half an hour on serendipitous coincidences, but I could. So many serendipitous coincidences have happened to me, and I bet this is something that resonates with all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't know how you're going to get out of it, or what the solution was? Well, we are being looked after. I think the funniest one I've got, and not the most profound at all, but I took down some lilac trees at my house here because the neighbouring school had put up a fence and didn't need the visual block, and they were old and past it, and one had been blown over anyway. Then I took a day off to dig out the stumps. Well, I had an office job at the time. After 2 hours digging, I was a physical wreck. I couldn't lift the spade anymore. So I went back to work on my computer. But just before I did, I let out this mental yelp to my late mother saying, look, I need your help, but how can you help? This is so physical. And it was just a joke, 10 minutes later, no kidding, there was a knock at the door. Landscape gardener, do you need any heavy work doing? The moral of the story is that we are being looked after. So just ask for help and just be aware of when you get the response. Now, Emma Hardinge-Britten. Now, she's well worth investing or reading about. You've probably heard about the National Spiritual Union's their 7 principles. Well, her mediumship went to formulate those, although it went through, if you like, a committee to form these things. And I think they missed out a couple of vital things. So the main thing is to search for the truth in every department of being. Continue to search for the truth all your life. Never cease to test whether what you believe is true. And then when you found the natural laws, try and understand them and live by them. It's like a light bulb moment, some of these things, this idea of never being unkind to anybody, never telling somebody a truth that might upset them unless it's absolutely necessary. And I love this one. Manifest love above and beyond all, seeking to cultivate in our families, kindred, friends, and amongst all mankind generally, the feeling of that true and tender love which can think, speak, and act no wrong to any living creature. Remembering always that where love is, all the other principles of right are fulfilled. There's a couple of links there. If you go to the Exeter Spiritist Centre website, you'll find them there. And this whole thing is in our language. I've seen the light at the end of the tunnel. I jumped out of my skin. Before I finish, I'll tell you about Tony Woody's near-death experience. He, nothing wrong with him. He was on an American plane that was in trouble, and the pilot got it wrong when they landed. They moved the flaps the wrong way or something, I don't know, but essentially he ended up landing on 2 different runways in the same landing, and he said he never wants to do that again. And he had this near-death experience. He described seeing a Coca-Cola can sort of flying through the air because the fireman wasn't expecting the plane to veer across the runway like that, and he was jumping out of the way to save his life. Anyway, he's met this being of light, and the quantity of love that he felt, he described as, imagine all the love from all the mothers who've ever lived coming at you all at once. Doesn't come close. And finally, namaste. I don't know whether you know the word. The Hindu meaning of it anyway is the divine in me bows to the divine in you. And a medium friend I was talking to last night said whenever she has a disagreement with somebody, she thinks it's the divine in that person. Basically, she is talking to God. So if you think of it like that, if you're talking to somebody who has the divine in them, who's also on a spiritual path, how can you be cross with them, even though there's a disagreement? So I think that's wonderful. But it's the end of my talk. Namaste.
What can I say, Jamie? You have spoken for an hour and 20 minutes, and we have don't apologize. Everybody has absolutely loved it. Very interesting comments coming in on the side. Personally, I want to thank you for tonight, for putting together all that wonderful PowerPoint presentation for us all as well. It's been really easy to follow and really, really thought-provoking. Just going by some of the comments, there was a few people commented saying they had experienced NDEs themselves, and because I like playing with figures, I worked out 7.5% of the people watching tonight have had NDE. That's quite a big percent.
I'd love to hear from them. If they want to share it with me, I'd love to hear from them. So do ask them to contact me.
Thank you. And I've also been posting, as you've mentioned, different sites like the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. I've been posting links to those for people to follow up themselves. So absolutely brilliant. We do have a few questions coming in. Now I've got to go quite the way back for one. So bear with me, talk amongst yourselves. There we go, Stacey Spark. So she's asking, could you, if you could, I'll try that in English. Could you put her under hypnosis to take her back to her time of her NDE when I met loved ones?
Well, there's never any guarantee, but in hypnosis, you tend to remember things that you didn't before. It's a state of focused attention, so it's quite possible. As I say, when I regress, or when I try and help people who are bereaved, they genuinely feel that the communication they've had is real. So it's very likely, but I can't guarantee it.
Wonderful. Where else were we? The lovely Sue Townsend.
Oh, Sue.
Yeah, we always rely on Sue for some really good questions. So this was raised at that time when you said you struggle with something outside of linear time.
Yeah, this is Michael Bohm. I think it's Michael Bohm. His thought that it is actually a holographic universe, and that memory, and I don't like mentioning this experiment with rats because how some of these scientists can do some of these things, but basically they're trying to identify where in the brain memory is, and so they taught these rats how to get through a maze. And I won't describe what they did to the rats, but basically there was no part of the brain that was responsible. So they felt. Michael Talbot has written a book called The Holographic Universe. That's well worth a read. I've got Bohm's name wrong. It's not Michael Bohm. But Bohm, it's his name. And there's another scientist who independently came up with this idea of a holographic universe. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. Personally, I think it's another way of talking about panpsychism, the Akashic records, universal mind, or whatever. It's basically all this information is available to all of us if we can only get the filter that's our brain out of the way. Indeed.
One of the stumbling blocks I find on my spiritual pathway sometimes is there is a thought or an image or an idea that I cannot put into words, because it doesn't make sense, or it can detract from the beauty or the sheer upliftment, because words fail it. Simple as that.
But just realised I haven't quite answered part of Sue's thing. This business about time. Yes, many things you read will talk about the past, the present, and the future all happening in parallel. Now, I can't get my head around that. It's an idea. But as I say, I can't conceive how that works. But it's definitely out there as an idea. Time doesn't seem to be what we think it is.
Now that's really interesting, because earlier on when I was getting ready, I love music. I love all types of music. And there was a couple of clips came up on YouTube of the old days out in Ibiza, places like that, which brought back many happy memories. And I did wonder, I did think, oh, you know, when I'm back home, can I go back and to relive that? And somebody went, yes, you can. Oh, okay. I'm looking forward to that then. Whey, I don't need a ticket. Happy days.
Yeah.
So, Jeanette Sand has a question. Yeah, interesting one. Because on what...
Yes, I didn't talk about negative NDEs, even though I had them on my slide. Basically, people don't want to talk about NDEs unless they're prompted, because for various reasons. One, they find it really difficult to put into words. Secondly, they think that people won't believe them. Now, the situation is worse when you have people who've had negative NDEs, because they might think other people will think badly of them. So there isn't enough research done into those. What there is, it doesn't seem to be anything to do with the level of spirituality that a person has had, but it could be because the experience hasn't quite finished, or it could be an interpretation of the experience, because lots of people describe going into this black space, a black void, but most say it's very peaceful. But if that's the sort of thing that might worry you, as you couldn't see anything, then that might, as you go through that, cause you to panic. But anyway, most people who even have negative NDEs are still very grateful for them, because they feel that they've had a chance to come back and address whatever issues that they may have done, if you like.
Do you know, that is extremely interesting for me personally. Many years ago, I was sat in a physical circle, and in one of the sittings, I went to somewhere, and you use that word void, and I just went to this place where there was nothing. Now, when I say nothing, I mean the absence of everything. And I found that quite disturbing. There was nothing ominous about it. It was just my perception of it, because even if you close your eyes, you can still see the sparkles and the colors. This was absolutely nothing. And a little later in the circle leader, who was in trance, turned to me and said, "You have touched the void and you needed to understand it." And do you know what? I'm going back 12 years. And it's there as I'm talking about it. That whole experience is there, you know. So, yeah, that is very interesting. I think that's it on the questions. Absolute load of very, very positive comments coming in. Sarah, I love this one.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Libby.
And trust me, there are many, many more of exactly the same energy. Oh, there we go. Andrew.
I'm sure Lawrence can give you my contact details, but if you Google me, or if you Google the Exeter Spiritualist Centre and send them an email, it'll come to me either way. But JAMIE AyLward, I've got a hypnotherapy business, so you can contact me by searching for that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I did put a link up to the Exeter Spiritualist Centre for the 10 laws.
Great. Yeah, there's details on that site of the Exeter email address, which basically comes to me. So
brilliant. Yeah. I shall just pop that into the comments box now for everybody. There we go. So, Jamie, what an amazing night.
Oh, bless you.
No, absolutely. And I know, do you know what? I know this is a bit material, but I know when we're having a really good night, because the numbers stay the same. And you've had just over 50 people totally entranced tonight.
Wow.
And that's on the live. And those numbers go up, because this is definitely one of those nights I think that we need to probably go back to in a little while to pick up on a few points where we've sort of maybe not grasp it. Brilliant presentation. So professional. Thank you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. I say I'm hoping to persuade Rachel, who had that NDE, to be interviewed, because in the communications I've had with her, she is such a spiritual lady, and I'm sure she could answer lots of people's questions. So if I succeed in that, I'll let you know a date that she's prepared to do it.
Brilliant. Yes, please. We would love that. These Saturday nights, for the benefit of everybody watching at the moment, these will continue with the church reopening. So fret not. I put a post out about some juggling of dates, and it did seem to be a few people have picked up on it negatively, saying, with that intent that it's all finishing. By no means is it finishing. In fact, it will expand and grow and encompass more topics. So worry not. We are not abandoning you, people. Gita. Jamie Aylward, Gita. And Gita, if I remember correctly, you are from Southampton Hospital as well, I think. So, yes, that was interesting as well about the NDEs and some of the experiences. Just up the road from us, we've got Paul General Hospital, and they've got operating theatres there. And this has been said to me twice on different occasions by different people, that in one of the operating theatres, they've got suspended ceilings, similar to what we have here with the tile. On the actual ceiling, behind the ceiling tile, there's a sequence of numbers. Oh. And if anybody has that flat line during their operation, they are asked, did you see any numbers and can you say what they are?
Yeah, there is a small problem with that, and that's that it seems that the people who have near-death experiences are more interested in the emotions of people. So it's what their eye is drawn to, but it's what their feelings are drawn to. So it's quite, and as these things are fairly rare anyway, the chances of actually capturing one of these things is statistically quite low.
Right. And that, as a working medium, I find that as well, it's already part of my knowledge base, because I often say to people, do you know what? When your loved ones say, I love you, they're not standing there saying that. We get the emotion. And we have to struggle sometimes to put that emotion into words. So, yeah, I totally get that about that emotion and feeling. And I know myself, when you really link in very, very closely with spirit, in fact, one of your slides, you said, you can't describe it, because it transcends everything that we know down here. How interesting. Jamie, I cannot thank you enough.
No, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No. We are indebted to you. And hopefully then, from what you've just said, we may see you sometime again in the future, which would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
We really, really look forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us out there tonight. Information overload, but that's absolutely fine, because you can watch this again on catch up on the church Facebook page under the videos tab, or you can go to our YouTube channel, just search PCSC on channels, and everything is kept into playlists on that channel. And if you subscribe to either of these channels, you will also get reminders of when we go live again. Next Saturday night, we have a crossover from our Spiritualism Lyceum nights into our Spirituality Saturday nights. Oh, so many titles I've got to learn. But we've got the lovely Melanie Blythe back, who will be giving us a special trance demonstration live online next Saturday night at 7 o'clock. I need to liaise with Mel just to find out which platform she'll be happiest with. Who I know when I ask her, she will say, I'll let you know after I've asked my guides. And I love that. So it'll either be on this platform or it will be a Zoom presentation. But that's next Saturday's, the 10th of April and again at 7 p.m. with a live trance mediumship demonstration. Jamie, just leaves me to say thank you, thank you, thank you, and to echo that sentiment. Wow, wow, and wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good night, everybody.